All right, following the stepped pyramid at Saqqara, the following Egyptian pharaohs built a series of pyramids. During the reign of Pharaoh Sneferro, a total of 3 pyramids were built. Of course, he didn't need 3 for his burial. He was experimenting to achieve the ideal tomb for himself. So Sneferro, a pharaoh right after Djoser, ruled between 2613 and 2589. So it's a long time ago, almost 5,000 years ago. So all these great architecture were achieved during the basically during the early dynasties of the Old Kingdom period, mostly, before 2500 BCE. So Sneferro built 3 of them, and they are very close to the Fayum Oasis. So this is the Fayum Oasis. So he built his pyramid at Meidum, the site known as Meidum, here. And he also built 2 more at a place called Dashur. So all the pyramids are on the west side of the Nile. This is the Nile River. The west bank is for the dead. And all the pyramids are also constructed just at the border of the flooding zone, right? So you see, this is the river proper, but during the flooding season, the river would reach this line. So there's a line, I hope you can see it. This is the flooding line. And here it expands to become the Fayum Oasis. So all the pyramids are built just next to it. The benefit is clear. During the ancient time, water surface is great for transportation, right? It's a great transportation. So by building right at the verge of water and land during flooding season, so during flooding season, they could ship material by water, by boat, right at the foot of the construction site. So this is a huge benefit for that. So Sneferro's 3 pyramid, the first one, the earliest one constructed, is collapsed. It collapsed. It is known as the Meidum Pyramid at Fayum, the Oasis site. And since it collapsed, so its height is really irrelevant because it didn't reach its ideal height. So you can just neglect that. But the base and the slope is really significant. It has a base of 144 meters square. And the slope is 51 degree, 53 cents. So nearly 52. But it collapsed. And the collapsed ruin let us see how it was constructed. So obviously they constructed the core and then added the side, right? So it's not like, building a platform and then put one on top of the other. So they start from the core and working to the surrounding layers of stone. The second one he built, that collapsed, so abandoned. The second one is known as the Bent Pyramid at Dashur. And that one, the base is much bigger. So seems like he learned the lesson. He might figure out that if the base is too small, then it won't support enough height. And so they started with a very large base, 189 meter square, but they also start with a very ambitious slope. The slope is bigger than the collapsed one. It's a 55 degree. However, at the middle, it slowed down. The ride slowed down. Why? Probably because they figure out if they continue with that, it will reach a great height, but it probably would collapse like the previous one. So they constructed a slower rising slope of only 43 degree, and that produced this kind of awkward looking bent pyramid. It obviously didn't satisfy the pharaoh. So he built a third, and this one, he started with even bigger footprint, 220 meters square. So it's bigger than the previous one. And now he did a very modest 45 degree, right? It's much smaller than the collapsed one. It is also much smaller than the second one when he started, but bigger than the upper slope. He experimented that slope would produce a stable one. So he started with something that is slightly bigger. And that one is the first real pure pyramid built on the Egyptian soil. So from the 3 pyramids by Sneferro, we can see they were trying something. And what they were trying to reach pure geometric form. So though that one is not pure, they want purity. This is pure geometric form. It is, it has perfect square plan, and it has, perfect triangle on the all equal in size and angle on the 4 sides. So geometry, earlier is like its characteristic. Want to achieve this kind of purity in architecture, and they did. Failure. And after that came the most famous of Egyptian pyramid. That is the Great Pyramid at Giza. So these 3 that are so famous, I'm not going to. All right, so we are back to our slide. So each pyramid is, a building complex. So it's not just a pyramid. It has, just like the complex at Saqqara, here the whole complex is not enclosed by a rectangular wall, but there are some kind of border delineation to separate one complex from the other. Each one also include a valley temple, a mortuary temple, a causeway, a boat pit, and then those walled court. The pyramid is just the most kind of monumental building in the complex. Excuse me. The valley temple is on the other side of the river. Say if this is the river, it should be much wider than that, of course, but I don't want to ruin that slide. On the eastern bank, there is a valley temple. And then right attached to the eastern slope of the pyramid is the mortuary temple. And the 2 temples are connected by a causeway. It's like, a Oh, I'm sorry. The Valley Temple is on the west side, west side of the Nile River, which is the natural boundary during the dry season. And then the Mortuary Temple is attached to the pyramid. Then there is a causeway, a constructed, elevated causeway connecting the two, right? So it's not on the east bank. There's no kind of bridge kind of crossing the Nile River. But the boat was used from the east bank to ship the body of the pharaoh to the west bank, to the Valley Temple. We don't know exactly what are the function of the Valley Temple. A possibility is this is the place where the body is being prepared and mummified, right? So in this Valley Temple, the Valley Temple had all been, badly damaged. None of them survive completely. Khafra's is slightly better, but Khufu's Valley Temple and Menkaura's are mostly gone. Khufu's is totally gone. So probably used for mummification, and after mummification, the body might be carried on the boat, on the very boat on which the body was shipped to the West Bank, and during a ceremonial procession and carried to the Mortuary Temple, and there the boats were buried in the boat pit, right, on the two sides of the Mortuary Temple. And the boat being a metaphor of transportation from this life to the next, or from this world to the next, is of symbolic significance, and they were part of the ritual ceremony for the mummification and for the burial of the pharaoh. Right, so these are the major component. So this one illustrates the relationship between the Valley Temple on the west bank of the Nile, the Mortuary Temple just at the border of the water during flooding season, and attached to the eastern slope, and the pyramid rising behind it. So we have a fairly good understanding of the Mortuary Temple attached to the pyramid. It shelters the statue of the pharaoh. So this is Khafra's statue in his Mortuary Temple. And the temple itself features a very thick wall. The rooms and spaces are almost like a cave dug into the mountainside, just like the pyramid itself. The mass of the solid stone is much bigger, the volume is much bigger than the space they define. This is true for the pyramid, obviously, which is mostly solid. This is also true for the temples. The temples are very solid. Those spaces are kind of left over within those enormous stone walls. This is the Valley Temple, the best survived Valley Temple for Khafra. So Khafra's Valley Temple is the best one that had survived. The stones were not a local stone, but shipped from Aswan. Aswan is like the southern border of ancient Egypt. It's bordering, bordering the southern Ethiopian tribes, which is pretty far away from Giza, but they were shipped by boat through the Nile River, and then continued during the flooding season to be shipped right at the construction site. And the stones are enormous. Some of them weigh 100 ton. So they are pretty monolithic structure, even though the whole structure is not one piece of stone, but the column, the beam are big stone. The columns are also kind of most of them in the Valley Temple are just one piece of stone. They have very good craftsmanship. The surfaces are polished, very smooth, and each piece of stone is custom made. So it's not like you quarry a bunch of standardized stone blocks and then just pile them together to create architecture. The stones are finely tuned to fix with one another. For example, at this corner, you might think it would be much easier to have just a cubical stone and then put a lintel on top of a cubic stone, cylindrical, vertical stone, but it is not. For example, this one, which formed the support for the lintel, has a curved to be connected with the perpendicular surface, right? So this is one piece of stone, and it goes in. So there's a curve, curving out. So it's a custom-made stone. The benefit, of course, by doing that, by making this small concave, it can receive the lintel perfectly. And that lintel, by the way, is not just one piece of straight stone. It also curves out a little to form another angle, a right angle, a curved right angle there. And then the wall continued with other stone, same as the upper layers that is connected with this lintel, this beam. So it obviously required a lot more labor and design compared to straightforward kind of stone block piling up, which is actually the way the pyramid is being constructed, but the temples are constructed with greater care to each individual stone. This is the boat, presumably used for the shipping of the body to the west bank. And after ceremony, they were buried in these pits and preserved in marvelous condition because of the dry desert climate. The pyramid, from the distance, it looks like kind of perfect geometry, but careful measure and observation shows they are not. So each triangular surface on the cardinal direction are kind of made of complicated shapes. There are 3 triangles, in fact. There's a triangular shape here, and then another triangular shape. And then at the bottom is another triangle. So they were made up of 3 triangles, bent at the middle, and on a certain day, when the sunshine, the angle of the sunshine, hit straight at the western slope, you will observe the northern and the southern slope lit by the sunshine differently. The western half is darker, the eastern half is brighter. So the sunshine just hit this half and allow us to see the gentle band in the middle. And this is only during specific moment of the year, you would be able to observe that. And so this is obviously not a mistake. This is a careful design. They were meant to create that inward bend. And the bottom, instead of a straight line, it is a bent line of 3 sections, right? This 3-section bend. And this is consistent for all the 4 sides. The accuracy of the pyramid, for the construction of the pyramid is beyond the question. There's no question they are very, very accurate. So these kind of bend and curve is not a mistake. And they are also perfect kind of geometric shapes. Just create an illusion of straight line, but when careful measurement was carried out and on a certain time of the year, one would be able to see that the kind of a seemingly pure, straightforward pyramidal shape was formed by much more complicated geometric shapes. And that just proved, again, the great surveying skill of the ancient Egyptians. The interior of the Kufu Pyramid, the largest one, has 3 chambers. We don't understand fully why they have 3, what happened, whether they construct one and then abandon and then construct another one. We don't fully know that. A possibility is, you know, they might be constructing something more modest in the beginning, but then as the Pharaoh live on, they start expanding it and figure out they need to construct, you know, something higher that is more centrally located. That is a possibility, but we don't know for sure. The reality is there are 3 chambers. The secret entrance is on the northern slope, right? So it's not on the river side, not on the Mortuary Temple side. It's on the northern slope. High above there's a sacred entrance. It goes down, and if you go straight, you reach the subterranean chamber. But at 1/3 of the length, it goes up just around the ground level. It's branched out to rise, and at the middle of that causeway, it branched out again flat to reach the so-called Queen's Chamber. If you continue with that rising, you pass through the grand corridor, the grand gallery. This is, you know, named by the archaeologists. These are not original Egyptian names, like the King's Chamber, King's Chamber, Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery, etc. These were all for convenience of reference, named by archaeologists. So this so-called Grand Gallery features tall ceiling of corbelled vault, right? So here we have this corbelled vault, basically one piece, the stone tapering inward, cantilevered inward until they reach at the top. And then we know that for the corbelled arches, corbelled vaults, we need a pressure from outside to consolidate them. So this is a case of the Newgrange passage tomb, which were consolidated, stabilized by the pressure of dirt. But here it's consolidated by the pressure of those stone, which is enormous. So passing through that grand gallery, one reach the so-called King's Chamber. And then for all those chambers, there are also ventilation, so-called ventilation shafts. And of course, in quotation mark, because no one was living there. So why do they need ventilation? They were aligned to the constellations aligned to Sirius and on one side, and then the Beta Ursa Minoris on the other side. So the holes, the tunnel, point to those constellations. So there are astronomical alignment, just like those prehistoric buildings at Newgrange, at Stonehenge. They were aligned with those astronomical phenomena. What do they mean? We don't know for sure, but some ancient astronaut theorists believe, human beings are aliens from other constellation, and these are pointing to our ancestral home, who, come to Earth from outer space. So this is the answer by the so-called ancient astronaut theorists. We don't know. These are, of course, wild imagination, because of the wonder the ancient Egyptians left to us. We don't have a good explanation, and we don't totally understand their religion. So, so that's a big question mark there. So here, this is you have a very good look at this corbelled vault, right? The Grand Gallery. After passing this, one reach the so-called King's Chamber. The King's Chamber, the largest internal space of the pyramid complex, because of it's located in the center, and the stone layers are the thickest above it. So it got some relief chambers. Those relief chambers would theoretically protect the chamber. If some layers collapse from above, these relief chambers would help to secure the last space where the sarcophagus is being stationed. And there is also a kind of slope right above the space, and that also helped to relieve the heavy weight to the side, to give extra protection to the space below. And it was very successful. So after thousands of years, they were still pretty much intact. So the scale of Khufu's pyramid, the largest of Egyptian pyramid, is somehow beyond imagination. There are in total 2.5 million stones laid in 210 layers. To build in 20 years, a 2.5-ton stone was placed every minute. And that was an enormous amount of work. So hundreds of thousands of slave laborers were working on the site day and night for decades. And some explanation about how they were built. All right, so they work from the core, again, from below to above, from center to the surrounding layers, right? And that would allow them, working in this fashion, they could save the building kind of scaffolding. They can use the lower structures as the ramp to carry stones to the upper layer. And eventually, all they need to do is to seal those steps. So basically, it's almost like the spiral, the spiral ziggurat in Khorsabad. And then after you build that kind of, the slope is much much bigger, of course, than the than the ziggurat, but it's the process is pretty similar. And after you build that kind of spiral ramp and of those steps, and then you put on the surface stone to seal it up, and it is during that process those gentle kind of a refinement of building those kind of bent surface was completed. The completed Kufu Pyramid length on each side is 756 feet. The height reach 481 feet. Now 450 left from the original site, height. And the slope is bigger than the previous Sneferro's successful pyramid. That one is about 45 degrees, and this one is between 51 and 52 degrees. So it almost reached the slope of the collapsed Sneferro pyramid. So obviously Kufu and his officials and craftsmen got bolder, and with the previous successful experiments. And it is also perfectly oriented to cardinal directions. So a lot of labor, a lot of work, a lot of money spent on the construction of pyramid. Why were they constructed? Why bother? So this is a big question. And we understood that for Egyptians, preparing for the next life is always significant, as indicated by the material they chose for building structures for life and death versus death. But for the pharaoh, the pyramid probably had extra meaning in addition to that concern about afterlife, because the pharaoh, as the powerful rulers, they had more ambitious aim to reach God, to join the divinity. So to some extent, the pyramid and the Book of Dead reproduce the same origin, one in word, the other in stone, right? So covered on their, buried with their sarcophagus is the Book of Dead, and the Book of Dead explain the purpose for the preservation of the body. So in one Book of Dead, it says, "A stairway to the sky is set up for me, that I may ascend on it to the sky." So the purpose is to reach sky, to join the divinity. The Egyptian worldview is that the sky is a god itself. The Duat is imagined as a divine being curving above earth. And the sun rise from east and descend from the west, or was born on the east and die on the west, going through that cycle. So the architecture of the tomb is meant to mimic that passage, passing through the sky and being reborn, hoping like the morning sun, being reborn on the east. So, and preserving the body permanently within this kind of eternal architecture would secure that successful passage for the soul to be reborn again and again for eternity. And Kufu, for example, called his pyramid the place of becoming a spirit. So it was meant for the pharaoh to achieve eternal life. So I'm going to, since we had the previous one, we are not going to have intermission at this place, so we will continue. All the great pyramids came from the Old Kingdom, right? So basically the greatest age of pyramid is before 2500 BCE, the early dynasties of the Old Kingdom. And after that, it declined. As a result, during the Middle Kingdom, the construction of pyramid, there was no great pyramid survived from the Middle Kingdom at all. So I'm just going to show you one example, a burial complex for a Middle Kingdom pharaoh, Senusret II. So his pyramid, his necropolis, completed around 1900 BCE, 1895 BCE, around that time, is just one structure of a huge complex, a huge city. The city itself is preserved just as good as the pyramid itself, because the pyramid itself was constructed not in stone, but in adobe. So that's the pyramid. It didn't survive. It's centuries younger than Khufu's pyramid, but what left there is just a hump of dirt. And the core is a natural outcrop of stone. So probably to save material. So the sun-dried brick around a big piece of natural stone would certainly help them to save a lot of labor and material. So it was not constructed with the same care and amount of labor as the Old Kingdom pyramid at all. Pyramid declined after the Old Kingdom. So Middle Kingdom building the funeral complex, however, seems like they pay a lot of attention to the service to the dead pharaohs, because at Kahun, the location of Senusret II's pyramid complex, a whole city survived, and that city, being located on the west side of the Nile, was not meant to be a city for for daily life. So it must be a city that was meant to provide daily care, daily service to the pyramid, right? So there is a whole city, and that city features buildings with real space. So it's not like a dummy city like the Saqqara. So it's real building and real city. Real people lived there. So the only explanation is that those people were stationed there, and hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them, to provide service to the pharaoh. So the decline of the pyramid does not mean the pharaoh were neglected or they were not taken care of. Rather, it might be the change of belief. Now, the tomb of the pharaoh needs to be taken care of on daily basis. So you need a whole city built to provide that service. While in the the ancient the Old Kingdom pyramids might not be visited as frequently as the Middle Kingdom. So the decline of pyramid doesn't mean the less authority pharaohs enjoyed during the Middle Kingdom. It might just be the change of kind of a funeral practice or service. It require kind of more frequent service. And as a result, more labor needs to be used to construct a city to provide the service. So we know this city very well. It is preserved in the dry desert climate, And so this city, like the pyramid, featured great geometry. It has a wall, a very thick wall, provide enclosure for the whole city. And the wall branch out to divide the city into two halves, a western half and the eastern half. It seems that the western half are for common kind of labors, and the eastern half features great mansion for the leaders of the community. Because on the west side, houses are small. On the east side, houses are enormous, big. And so the large compound here, for example, so this is the expansion of that corner, shows the smaller size houses on the west side and the big houses on the east side. So this big house, for example, features a series of courtyards. And then those courtyards are the place where the rooms open their window and the doors to. And they form a kind of axis in the middle, right? The entrance was not directly in the middle to provide privacy. The entrance is actually quite complicated. So you enter from the side and goes through a corridor, must be very dark corridor to reach the front room and to reach the back. So toward the back, the living environment become better and better. So you have this nice courtyard with 4 columns. And then in the very back, you have a courtyard with a veranda on one side. So there must be a very nice shaded area to enjoy the flushing plants and maybe water fountains as well in that space. So it's a big house. And then the side rooms has additional spaces for storage and for living spaces, probably bedrooms and dining areas. So it has a kind of big area. And then the smaller one, of course, is much more simplistic. So it shows great kind of a hierarchical division in their population as well. The pyramid continued to decline. And for the Middle Kingdom period, pyramid was entirely replaced by Mortuary Temple. So the previous small temple attached to the slope of the pyramid, now during the New Kingdom period, became the main structure for the mausoleum of the kings. In the Valley of the King, on the west bank of the Nile River, Middle Kingdom and the New Kingdom kings were buried there. At this location of the Valley of the King, side by side, we have a tomb complex for a Middle Kingdom pharaoh and a tomb complex for a New Kingdom pharaoh. So here we have the plan of these two complex. The Middle Kingdom complex was for the 21st century BCE pharaoh Mentuhotep. And the New Kingdom complex was for the 1500 BCE female pharaoh Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was a daughter and wife and mother of pharaohs. So his father was a pharaoh. His husband, her father was a pharaoh. Her husband was a pharaoh, and her son was also a pharaoh. And she herself was also a pharaoh. So this is a very a rare case of a female who became a ruler in Egypt and anywhere of the ancient world. Her building complex is here. So you might be able to see that in this plan, for Mentuhotep's building complex, there is a solid core in the middle of the peristyle hall, multi-column hall. And the only explanation for that solid thing there is it used to support a pyramid above it. But for Hatshepsut complex, there's no solid core anymore. Those corridors are surrounding courtyards, and there's no kind of a solid stone core in the middle of the courtyard, which means there's no pyramid incorporated into the complex. So the Middle Kingdom funeral complex still have some left over, and this is a reconstruction drawing of Mentuhotep's funeral complex or mortuary temple. This is generally referred to as the Mortuary Temple. Well, Mortuary Temple used to be, during the Old Kingdom period, just a tiny small building attached to the northern slope. But during the Middle Kingdom, and especially during the New Kingdom period, the Mortuary Temple is the majority of the complex, while the pyramid was reduced to a minor kind of a finale in the complex. And in the New Kingdom period, it is totally gone and entirely replaced by the Mortuary Temple. So that is a reconstruction drawing of Mentuhotep's Middle Kingdom. Now we will focus on Hatshepsut, her Mortuary Temple from 1500 BCE. The location is known as Deir el Bahari, and this is of course a later Arabic name for the site. The place is referred to in general as the Valley of Kings because many Middle and New Kingdom kings were buried there. So side by side, Mentuhotep and Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut's mortuary temple is also much bigger than her Middle Kingdom predecessor. This is a portraiture of Hatshepsut, and she was a ruler, so she needed to dress like a ruler. And a ruler in ancient Egypt meant you need to have beard. So her kind of portraiture shows her wearing those artificial beard and wearing the hat, showing the unification of Egypt, combining the combining the upper and the lower kind of distinctive crown. So her mortuary temple features a great courtyard, a giant slope leading from the ground to the first platform, and then the second platform defined a courtyard, and then there are also side courtyards as well. And ascending the second slope, one reach the an upper temple, which were dug into the mountainside, and that is the temple for the sun god Amun, to whom Hatshepsut claim descendants. So she was a daughter of a pharaoh, but she was also a daughter of God, the mother god Hada, and the sun god Amun. So here, the wall, the mural behind the corridor left some kind of interesting record about the construction. One of them shows the Hatshepsut sent out a fleet to the coastal area on the Red Sea coast to acquire the plant for fragrance, and the pond, which is a real place on the coast, but it also featured in the Egyptian mythology as the origin of the universe. It was believed that the world first appeared from the water as a marshland, and from there the god was born, and God built simple hut for themselves. And so that's the name was later associated with the Ethiopian coastal area, that the name of the pond. And it is also kind of the legendary place where the universe, the world started in Egyptian mythology. So some of the murals referred to some of the expeditions Hatshepsut sent to that coastal area, which indicate the expansion of the Egyptian world. So Egyptian world during the the New Kingdom period was not limited anymore to the Nile River. So Egyptians during this period made expeditions to the Red Sea, to the Sinai Peninsula, and also to the eastern coast of Mediterranean, today's Palestine area, and the ancient Levant. So a noteworthy detail of these columns is the at Hatshepsut's funeral complex is the appearance of capital. So here we have the column, unlike the Mortuary Temple from Giza, from the Old Kingdom period. Here, two things that is noteworthy. One is these columns are made of drums. They are, like the King Djoser's columns, of course, but Djoser's stepped pyramid columns, they are not real freestanding column. They are a kind of a illusion of column. They are actually small wall, the end of short walls. But here we have the real columns built with drums. And more interestingly, there is an abacus on the top. And this bears great similarity to the Greek order of Doric. Doric capital looks very much like this. So it is widely believed that the Greek columns were greatly inspired by these Egyptian prototypes. And the Greeks certainly knew about Egypt, and they were in contact with the Egyptians for a long time, for many, many centuries. So there were oral tradition talking about the communication. So these certainly would be known to the Greeks, by the 7th century BCE, for example. And they bear great similarity to the Greek Doric order in its kind of fluted surface, right? So this kind of lines are called fluting, those vertical line, fluted surfaces, as well as the transition with abacus, expanding the top surface of the column to provide a more solid support of their lintels. So these also like future Greek temples. So here the stone were used in a post and lintel fashion. In another word, the stone were pretty much used as if they were wooden logs. They were not used to construct arch and vault, for which the stone perform the best, but used pretty much like a piece of wood, for which the span cannot be very big, right? The span is It's because stone is not good at spanning a space in that way. So all these, the significance increased because of their connection with the most influential architectural system in the world, that is the Greek classical system. So this is the predecessor to that. And we, for the first time, see it appeared in 1500 BCE at Hatshepsut's funeral complex. Compare with the Old Kingdom, you know, this is like 1,000 year, more than 1,000 year older than Hatshepsut. So you should be able to recognize this, right? So it might appear in your midterm exam. So reflect on it, right? So you should know this is from King Joseph stepped pyramid funeral complex located at Saqqara, all right? It's from about 2600 BCE. So as long as you know it's roughly there, around 2600 BCE, that's pretty much enough. So this is not a real column, that's a real column. This one still bear great similarity to the planned column for which it was meant to mimic. And here it is a real kind of stone construction, not mimicking any previous kind of temporary architecture anymore. So Hatshepsut claimed that she was mothered by Hathor and fathered by Amun. Hathor was the goddess of motherhood, and Amun was the sun god. So she claimed that she was descendant from divinity. And toward the middle part of the, and the later part of the New Kingdom, gradually pharaohs would claim themselves as divinity and kind of identify themselves as god and goddesses instead of being simply serving or being the intermediate between God and earth. So raised high above all the platforms, all the halls and courtyard is a temple cut into the cliff. So there, the orientation is oriented toward winter solstice once again. Okay. So only during the few days around the winter solstice, the sunshine would pass the little hole above the entrance and shed on the face of the statue of Amun. Right, so here at the very back, we have the statue of Amun, the sun god. And so that orientation for the complex is toward the winter solstice. And more, so the height of this passage is lined up in a way that at night, if you connect the eye of Amun, the first opening, the inner opening, and then the outer opening, the line would point to constellation Sirius again. So that constellation obviously had great significance for the Egyptians. They meant something. They had connection with their god and with their belief as well. So again, those astronomical phenomena, astronomical heavenly body was a direct cause for the form and space of architecture in ancient Egypt. And let alone their orientation, just like what we have observed in the Neolithic period for some of those most famous monuments from that time. So give you a reminder of the New Grand, right? You just did that without any problem for your quiz. Now, those complexes are mortuary tombs. They are associated with burial practice. But during the New Kingdom period, finally, architectural complex serving life survived on the east bank of the Nile. So far, most Egyptian architecture survived to this day are on the west side, which means they are serving the dead. But starting with the New Kingdom period, many stone architecture survived on the east bank, and they are temples. And these temples are not mortuary temples, are not associated with the necropolis, not associated with the city for the dead. They are actual temples that are used for festivals, for ceremonies. And these ceremonies utilize this permanent stone temple in their city to make a claim that their rulers were part of the divine lineage of the god. So this is the point I wanted to make by looking at the temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor. Karnak and Luxor, they are very close to each other. So today, is a city of Karnak. And Luxor is in its suburb. In the old time, the Karnak Temple and the Luxor Temple are two major temple sites. They are dedicated to sun god Amun. And they were used especially during the Opit festival. During this festival, a festival for renewal. So this is also a festival for renewal, to celebrate, to renew the earth. And at the end of the flooding season. So for the Egyptians, that is the renewal of their agriculture, renewal of their life, at the end of the flooding season. So during the Opit festival, statue of gods were carried in the sacred bark, which is a small sailing boat, to the Nile to perform the mystical union of Amun and Mu, which ensure the land's fertility. So again, kind of a marriage of God to secure fertility of agriculture. And this is a time-honored practice for many civilizations. We have seen it in Mesopotamia, and some of the Neolithic monument might be for the same solar mate interpretation or the visit not only the perform the physical connection between the dead king and the living God by incorporating them in the same ceremonial performances, they were making a statement that the kingship is part of the lineage of the divine lineage. So the temple of Amon at Karnak and Luxor, they are oriented as a result not according to cardinal direction, but according to the ceremonial passage. For example, at Luxor, the temple is oriented along the Nile River. So this is the Nile River. It is oriented facing to the north along the Nile River. The reason is the Karnak Temple is located at the north. So this is the Luxor Temple. It is, the entrance is facing that way because that's the processional passageway. While the Karnak Temple is oriented toward the west because after visiting the Karnak Temple, the parading would cross the river to go to the temple, the Valley of the King on the other side, right? So they have different orientation. The orientation are basically following the passageway, the ceremonial passageway. So this is the Amon Temple at Luxor. It has a, it was constructed over many centuries. The oldest part is the southern part and expanded later and finally expanded by Ramisung the Great. So the heart of the temple is actually the smallest, the humblest part. It is identified with the home of God, modeled after the residential home. According to Egyptian Genesis mythology, Amon resided in a simple reed hut on the raised Benben surrounded by marshes. So Benben is like the original land emerging from the marsh in the beginning of the world. So the Sacred Heart, it's small. And in one of the small rooms, there is the bark, the small boat, and that boat was used to during the parade, during the Opet festival. Then from there, a series of hypostyle hall grow generation after generation until it reached its apex in the 15th century, 15th century BCE, under Ramesses II. So the, as a result, the grandest entrance was constructed the latest, right? The oldest Sacred Heart was constructed the earliest. So that created this kind of reduced monumentality, what we call it reduced monumentality, which means the most sacred part of the temple is actually the smallest part. And that small and tighten up spatial experience was probably also designed so because the expanded entrances were also lowered in ground. So in another word, as you are marching from the more recent entrance to the oldest heart, not only the ceilings are reduced, but also the ground are raised. So you are going higher and higher, but the roof are going lower and lower. As a result, the most sacred part are the lowest and smallest space. So this is called the reversed monumentality. So the physical grandness does not mean the most significant in the sacred space. So we are looking at the courtyards. This is called the Amenhotep courtyard, built in the 1400 BCE. And after that, Amenhotep courtyard looking from the another direction. It features the lotus capital. So here we have these capitals and mimicking the lotus flower, a symbol of Upper Egypt. And the last courtyard, this one, was built by Ramesses, also known as Ramesses the Great. So Ramesses built the largest courtyard at Luxor Temple, and he also built this pylon. And a pylon, we introduced the term pylon in Mesopotamian architecture. So in Egyptian architecture, there are similar structures that, towers framing an entranceway. And this is, by the way, older than the Babylon city, the Babylonian pylon. And so, who learned from whom is a question mark, even though we introduced the Mesopotamian pylon earlier. So there is no pyramid in the New Kingdom Egyptian tomb. There is also no pyramid in the temple. However, a new type of monument appear in the New Kingdom, that is the obelisk. Right? The obelisk in Egyptian temple were used in a pair, framing the entrance just in front of the pylon. And at Luxor, one of them was brought to France during the Napoleon War. And so only one is left there. To some extent, the obelisk could be understood as a kind of a tiny pyramid raised on top of a column, right? So on the top, there is a pyramid, but that pyramid it's small. However, it's a shining point. It's just like the pyramid. The pyramid at Giza, Khufu's pyramid, the apex was also surfaced with polished limestone that is kind of shining, creating that kind of shining surface visible from the distance, just like the white temple on the Ziggurat at Uruk that we introduced last time, right? So creating that kind of high shining spot are the purpose of the pyramid of Old Kingdom Egypt, also the temples in Mesopotamian Ziggurat. It is also the purpose for the obelisk in New Kingdom temples. So to create that kind of shining high point, it is the symbol of God, the appearance of God, of course. So that the orientation of the temples are oriented toward the passageway, and that passageway was marked out by the framing sphinx sculptures. So these sphinx are half human, half beast creatures that were also of divine significance. And the most famous one, of course, is the one in front of the Kufu Pyramid. But that sphinx was built not, many thousand years after the pyramid itself. Right? It was constructed, not many thousand, at least 1,000 years after that. It was built during the New Kingdom. So even at the Giza complex, the Sphinx, the giant Sphinx, was also a New Kingdom addition. So here at the temples, many smaller Sphinx lined there. Not all of them have lion's head. Some of them have ram's head. Some of them has lion's head, but they were all called sphinx. This kind of, the body, the lion's body or ram's body. So the kind of animal body and human-faced creature, and that human head were dressed like a pharaoh, like a ruler with long beard and unique headdress. So it's the ceremonial function for these temples replaced those funeral function of the Old Kingdom temples, and now they are part of the architectural environment to consolidate the status of a king as a god. This was achieved under Ramesses II. His reign. I'm sorry, did I say that his 15th century? His the 1300 BCE, the 14th to 13th century ruler. Ramesses II. He was, a contemporary of Moses in the biblical history. So Ramesses II was the most famous king, Egyptian king of the New Kingdom period. He was also very ambitious. He expanded the territory of Egypt into an empire. He fought the Hittite from the north of Mesopotamian region, and he also conquered the ancient Levant for many decades. He also ruled for many, many years. He died in his 90s. So he had a long career to allow him to build monumental architecture. So his addition to the Luxor temple is this part. He also built the pylon and those obelisks, wrote around 1300 BCE. And Luxor temple used, capitals of both Upper and Lower Egypt. The papyrus capital for Lower Egypt, and the lotus capital for Upper Egypt. So we have those, the lotus capital and the papyrus capital. They are kind of the bud. There were also the kind of open one, right? So lotus capital and papyrus capital, respectively. And both capitals are used here to, again, make a statement about the unification. So other pictures, demonstrate the scale of the temple, really enormous scale. So some images from the Karnak Temple. The Karnak Temple facing the west to the river. And here, the columns were also kind of used as some kind of documents. There were carvings on the body of the columns. And these carvings are in Egyptian hieroglyph. They are basically, a book in stone. So you can read inside this temple. In other words, the whole temple is also a huge document. Each column is like a page in a book. And they are of enormous scale as well. But the structure is constructed in the post and lintel fashion using stone. So the intercolumnar distance cannot be very big. So as a result, you find a forest of column, and the space are interrupted by these giant columns. It won't be until the Roman time that stone were used in its proper fashion to create large interior space by constructing those great vault. So Ramesses, the most ambitious Egyptian New Kingdom pharaoh, built properly for himself a giant city for his burial. All right, so this is called the Ramisung. The Ramisung is the mortuary temple for Ramesses II, but it is dedicated simultaneously to Amun and the deceased king. By combining his mortuary temple with the temple dedicated to the sun god, he was making a statement that he himself was identified with God. And indeed, after ruling for more than 50 years, he was like, for most Egyptians who never lived without Ramesses II, Ramesses was like the god, like the sun and the moon, and his falling seems unthinkable. It was said that after he died, Egyptians didn't know what to do because that the world was unimaginable without Ramesses. So he built for himself this giant complex, which features an enormous temple dedicated both to himself and to Amun. And his statue appeared everywhere. And his statue is virtually not differentiable from the statue of Amun. So in Hatshepsut's temple, you can still tell which statue was Hathor, which statue was Amun, which statue was the pharaoh herself. But here, you cannot tell them apart. So the same statue appeared in the location for Amun, also in the location for Ramesses himself. It was surrounded by an entire city, and that city features rooms that were tunneled and using real kind of a burial vault, but constructed with brick and featuring those long tunneled space. And those are probably mostly used for storage. And then in the areas closer to the entrance, there are more rooms, and those are probably for service for the people who stationed there. So it was a large area, and serving the pharaoh, and his temple was identified with God. The decoration on the wall also shows different spirit. So here on the wall, it shows Ramesses riding a chariot, shooting arrow. So there is a greater military spirit in the decoration of Ramisung. And this is very appropriate as well, because at this time, both Egypt and Mesopotamia entered the imperial age. And this is also the time of the Assyrians in Mesopotamia. And we see the same kind of transition to this military spirit. All right, so that's, let's see, 1 minute, just show you this picture, shows the archaeological site with those storage. And Ramesses' most famous heritage is probably this Ab-Simbel monument, right? So this Ab-Simbel monument is not a funeral temple. It is just a temple. It's a monument to show the ego of Ramesses. You know, that's how I would define it. Because it's a temple dedicated to Amun, but the statue here are all Ramesses. So this giant statue are Ramesses, and his wife, his queens, are sculpted in tiny, small figures at the foot. This is very different from the Old Kingdom. If you go to the Museum of Fine Art, just across the campus, you will see some Egyptian Old Kingdom sculpture of Pharaoh and the Queen. They are sculpted in the same size. And the Pharaoh is kind of warmly embracing the Queen, very fashionable, very kind of a very equal. You know, the queen and the pharaoh are very equal in terms of their size, and more realistic and more family-like. But here, this is totally different. So this is the husband, and these are the wives. And he is giant. He has, and then inside there's a statue. You know, theoretically, it should be the statue of Amun, but they bear the same look as this guy. So it's basically undifferentiable. And its function is to face the border of Egypt. So it is facing the southern border. This is at the southern border of ancient Egypt. So it's basically making a declaration of the great Ramesses as the great ruler of Egypt to its neighbors. And there is the king's temple. There's also the queen's temple here as well, but the size, again, is much smaller. So it was relocated in 1964 to 8 to a higher location because of the reservoir, the construction of Aswan Dam of the reservoir. But it was kind of originally it was at a lower ground, but pretty much facing the water in the same way at the southern countries, the Nubian border, the Nubians. That's what's the kind of the term I was blank on previously. The Nubians, who are the kind of the southern neighbor of the Egyptians, right? So this is at the Nubian border. The inside, featuring the temple, receive direct sunshine twice a year. And it is oriented also according to the kind of sun, not winter solstice, but also specific time of the year. And so here, if we compare it with Hatshepsut, where the pharaoh can be differentiated from gods, here, you know, the pharaoh is Amun, the king is sun god. Egyptian, you know, pharaoh's authority reached its apex at the reign of Ramesses II. So, all right, I think